Hello. Today is the weekly update on Thursday, October 23rd, 2025. We're at day 748. What a week it has been. As of the writing of this update, the ceasefire had still held, but boy, is it tenuous. I wanted to just take a minute and say, why do we do these videos? And why have we done these videos every single day for the past 748 days? For me, and I think also for Fael, who does every single one with me, she manages our social media and posts these. For both of us, this is a bit of a personal spiritual discipline that we were asking the question of what's one thing that we can do to try to give witness to what's happening. And it might seem odd to consider this a spiritual discipline. Most of it's news and things like that, information you might be able to find in other places. But for us, this is a way to say we're paying attention. We're giving witness. We see what's happening and we're giving it to God, almost like receiving the news and then putting it before the throne. If you're familiar with Proverbs chapter 3, it says, wisdom cries out from the street. She raises her voice from the square. She cries out. She cries out. By telling the stories we hear from on the ground, and we have direct relationships there, personal relationships, from meetings, from conversations, also stories you can hear in other places all over the news. We still are giving witness to what's happening to the people in the Middle East, the people of Gaza, the children of Gaza, the people who lost loved ones on October 7th, the people in South Lebanon, where almost every day at least one person is killed. We're giving witness to those people, and we're asking God to provide us with clarity of thought and mind as we seek to understand and respond faithfully as peacemakers in the name of Christ. So what's happening? The ceasefire, it holds, but oh so tenuously. Last week, Thursday, a week ago, U.S. officials said that Trump's peace plan remains on track despite Israel's threat to resume the war with Gaza due to Hamas's delay in returning the bodies of hostages. A U.S. advisor said that right now the intention is to keep working with both parties, getting them both to show restraint and creating the right conditions for demilitarization to occur. President Trump said yesterday that Israeli forces could return to Gaza as soon as he says the word if Hamas refuses to uphold their end of the deal. Now, over the weekend, the ceasefire literally unraveled. Israel accused Hamas of violating the agreement. In response, it resumed bombing of the enclave. This weekend, Gaza was bombed once again, even though there's a ceasefire. Israel also temporarily suspended the delivery of humanitarian aid, but by Sunday night, both Hamas and Israel had begun the renewed enforcement of the ceasefire, and things were kind of sort of back on track. The White House deployed its top aides to Israel. You might have heard. Vice President J.D. Vance joined Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. They went on Tuesday. The high-level visits came as American officials are increasingly concerned that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, could dismantle the U.S. brokered agreement. Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, an advisor, and son-in-law Jared Kushner did also return to Israel this week. J.D. Vance was in Israel. He met with Prime Minister Netanyahu in West Jerusalem to discuss the phase 2 of the ceasefire deal, followed by a broader meeting with more senior level staff. Later in the day, Vance met with the president of Israel, Herzog, at his official residence to talk about ways to move forward to implement the Trump 20-point peace plan. Now, why would the U.S. send our vice president to Israel? Because of the fears that the ceasefire won't hold. There are some significant attempts at diplomacy being moved forward in the Trump administration, just even right now, and we hope and pray they're successful in holding off re-engagement in Israeli attacks on Gaza and bringing about a permanent end to the war and violence, to the ethnic cleansing, to what many experts around the world call genocide. What was Israel's response to Vice President Vance's visit? The Knesset welcomed Vance to Israel by passing 2 different West Bank annexation bills in their first reading. Basically, while Vance was meeting with Netanyahu on October 22nd, the 2 bills still have to be sent to the committee, and they might even die there. But the politics behind 2 bills that had their first reading on annexation, the significance and the politics behind what passed today in the Knesset is more important than the bills. Vice President Vance said at a press conference in Israel that the Trump administration is not going to force anything on Israel regarding which forces will be deployed in the Gaza Strip, but added that Turkey has a constructive role to play. The next 30 days are going to be critical, according to U.S. officials who are now in charge of what's going on in Gaza when it comes to the implementation of a deal. They said, we're going to be calling the shots. Both Israel and Hamas have accused the other of violating the ceasefire agreement. Hamas still, as of yesterday, hasn't returned 13 of the 24 deceased hostages' bodies. Over the weekend, Trump said he would greenlight Israel to resume the war if Hamas does not live up to its end of the deal by returning those bodies. Hamas maintains many of the bodies are buried in tunnels that Israel later destroyed, and heavy machinery is required to be able to get access to them for the rubble to be removed for their retrieval. Israel did return the bodies of another 15 Palestinians on Saturday. That total brought the total number to 135. Doctors at Nasser Hospital in Han Yunis said the bodies showed signs of torture and execution, including blindfolds, cuffed hands, and bullet wounds to the head. Those were according to doctors' accounts. On Sunday, there was an incident, and the IDF said that the incident happened in the morning when Hamas militants came out of a tunnel in the Rafah area, which is still controlled mainly by the Israeli military, and they launched an anti-tank missile at an IDF vehicle. My understanding is 2 Israeli soldiers were killed. On the other side, Hamas's military wing denied that they were involved in that incident in Rafah, and they emphasized they're fully committed to the ceasefire. It seems Hamas lost some of the control of the areas that Israel took over, and so they were saying that whatever soldiers were left on that side were not currently acting on behalf of the Qassam brigades or the military wing of Hamas. Axios described the situation this way. They said Israel heavily bombs Gaza, and it seems for the moment that the ceasefire and the rest of the Trump plan dodged a major bullet on Sunday. Near Rafah, Palestinian fighters, they're talking about emerging from the tunnel. This was on the yellow line, the Israeli side. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed, 3 were wounded, or a third was wounded. The IDF responded by first attacking the tunnel area, killing Palestinian fighters and civilians, and Israel and Hamas both accused each other of violating the ceasefire. Now, Hamas accused Israel of violating the ceasefire because of bombing and the killing of Palestinians, both militants and civilians. But listen to what happened on Friday. 11 members of a Palestinian family were killed. It was described as the deadliest single violation of the fragile ceasefire since it took effect at that point 8 days ago. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency said the family was trying to reach its home in the Zaytun neighborhood. They were on a bus and it was attacked for allegedly crossing the yellow line, which is essentially an imaginary boundary mentioned by the Israeli army. And a spokesperson for the Gaza Civil Defense said the family can't distinguish between a yellow line and a red line when there's no physical markers on the ground. At that point, Israel's war on Gaza had killed at least 68,116 people and another 170,200 were wounded. Israel conducted airstrikes, as I mentioned, on Sunday. While Israel accused Hamas of those killings and violating the truce, Trump said it was possible that Hamas leadership was not involved. Meanwhile, 23 Palestinians were killed in Israeli airstrikes. Friday, a man was killed by an Israeli drone southeast of Khan Yunis, and there are reports of others being seriously injured. Gaza's media office accused Israel of violating the ceasefire with Hamas 47 times, and bringing about the death and killing of 38 Palestinians and an additional 143 being wounded. On Wednesday, yesterday, a Hamas delegation met with Turkish officials in Qatar. On Tuesday, the group said that they remain committed to the ceasefire despite repeated violations. The delegation accused Israel of delaying implementation by failing to open the Rafah border for allowing the travel of sick and injured people and allowing humanitarian aid to enter into Gaza. Tuesday, Hamas returned 2 more bodies, which included the 85-year-old Aryeh Zalmanovich, the oldest Israeli hostage, who was abducted from his home in kibbutz Nir Oz. He was killed in captivity on November 17th, just over a month after his abduction. And also the body of 38-year-old Master Sergeant Tamir Adar, who was a member of the community's security squad, who was killed fighting Hamas gunmen on October 7th. 13 bodies, it's believed, of hostages remain in Gaza as of yesterday. Israel returned to the ICRC, or Israel returned to the International Red Cross the bodies of an additional 15 on Wednesday. You'll recall 15 Palestinian bodies are supposed to be returned for every Israeli body. As of yesterday, 54 additional Palestinian bodies were recently handled handed over to the Red Cross. So what are the issues of this ceasefire agreement that have yet to be resolved, this 20-point plan? There are many. Reconstruction, who's going to do it? Who's going to fund it? How's it going to be done? There's some preliminary agreements, but nothing written, confirmed. They're working on plans for construction of what they're calling a new Rafah as a model for Gaza that will not be under Hamas rule. One of the main issues that's yet to be resolved is the disarming of Hamas. It's part of the 20-point plan. Hamas hasn't said they're going to do it yet. They said they agreed to the plan, but there's not specificity on what that will look like. Despite being clearly identified as one of the 20 points in Trump's plan, Hamas has not yet agreed to disarm. President Trump and Vice President Vance warned on Tuesday that Hamas will face swift, severe action if it does not comply with the ceasefire plan, which includes disarmament. And so here, what we said from day one of the ceasefire agreement is we hope it holds, but the major issues that need to be resolved are not yet resolved. If Hamas doesn't cooperate, as the President of the United States has said, Hamas is going to be obliterated. So said Vance. Earlier, Trump wrote that an end to Hamas would be fast, furious, and brutal if the group fails to do what is right. It is still unresolved on who will be a part of the international security force in Gaza. And I've said and heard from analysts, and I believe this to be true, Israel has very little incentive to allow an international security force in Gaza, even if it includes UN and other Arab, forces, because if they do, they will no longer be able to bomb Gaza. Why would they give that up? With the goal, there are three kind of main points of actions in terms of the international security force. France, the UK, and the US are trying to finalize a UN Security Council resolution. For many of the countries involved, they will need that to happen, the UN to be involved before they can send troops. Indonesia, Azerbaijan, and Pakistan are in talks to provide troops for a future stabilization force. That's the second action in that regard. And throughout the Middle East, as a third example, discussions are underway on deploying international security forces. The UAE is a part of those conversations. There was a Gulf summit in Abu Dhabi. And so that is a possibility as well. Meanwhile, countries are skittish about contributing troops to an international security force that would be tasked with maintaining peace. There are major stumbling blocks to that being achieved. Humanitarian assistance continues to be used as a weapon of war. I am dejected in my body as I give this update because these are things we've been saying for 700 and some days, and here in a ceasefire, they still are true. Palestinians in Gaza are still desperate for food and water as large-scale aid deliveries called for by the UN and the international community still face Israeli roadblocks. Now, there was, in the beginning of the week, in the past week, there was some news that things were getting better, and then it was, wait till you hear. The UN said on Friday that it will take time to reverse the famine in the Gaza Strip and urged the opening of all crossing points to avoid and scale back famine. The amount of humanitarian assistance, listen to this, it's less than 15% of what is needed or called for. On Wednesday, news reported only 986 trucks carrying humanitarian aid have entered into Gaza. 986 have been allowed into Gaza of the 6,600 that were supposed to have gone in. 15% have been allowed in since the ceasefire took effect. You want to tell me humanitarian assistance is not being used as a weapon of war? The UN Food Program said that their numbers are far short of their daily target because only 2 crossings are open. Late last week, Israeli and US officials said Israel was providing quantities of aid to Gaza that meet the amount required under the ceasefire agreement. An Israeli official told CNN that Israel only allowed 300 trucks, half the required amount, in that day, Wednesday. The ICJ was scheduled to deliver an advisory opinion. I'll talk more about that tomorrow on the obligations of Israel to ensure humanitarian aid reaches Palestinians. The bottom line is the ICJ said, yes, they're obligated. I'll give you the details tomorrow. The Rafah crossing will be closed until further notice. Hassam Abu Safia, the director of Kama Adwan Hospital, was not released, but was sentenced to 6 months of detention and may be one of those included in the legislation that was introduced in the Israeli Knesset that calls for the death penalty for anyone involved in October 7th. Marwan Barghouti, a prominent Palestinian prisoner, was beaten unconscious by Israeli prison guards on September 14th. Barghouti was allegedly handcuffed, put on the floor, beaten by guards, according to testimony by 5 separate Palestinian detainees who were released. These are false claims, said the Israeli Prison Service. We are witnessing evil being manifested in the world right before our eyes. And Christians or people of any faith or people, just humans, for us to treat one another this way is not only abhorrent, it's an atrocity against God. We should be concerned about the reports that the US is talking about rebuilding areas that are only under Israeli control. My question is, will they ever allow Palestinians to move back to those areas? Jared Kushner, in some media reports, has said, we're building it for the Palestinians. But my fear is that this could lead the way for potential annexation of some of those areas. Meanwhile, what's happening on the ground in Gaza and the occupied West Bank? Tuesday, the Palestinian Education Ministry said the number of students killed in the Gaza Strip has risen to 19,910. More than 30,000 have been wounded. 179 government schools have been completely destroyed. Destruction and forced displacement persists in the West Bank. Yesterday in the West Bank, Israeli forces carried out new raids across the occupied territory, detaining at least 22 Palestinians yesterday morning. The UN office, OSHA, yesterday released figures saying that 14 Palestinians have been killed and 200 more wounded in the occupied West Bank in the last month. With the ceasefire in effect, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the much criticized aid group run by the U.S. security contractors and backed by Israel, has suspended its operations in Gaza. Infectious diseases in Gaza are spiraling out of control, says the World Health Organization. Only 13 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are even partially functioning, whether it be meningitis, diarrhea, respiratory illnesses. We're talking about a mammoth amount of work. In Lebanon, one day this past week, a man riding on a motorcycle was killed in South Lebanon. On another day, an Israeli strike on a construction vehicle killed a man. Almost every day, we see attacks or deaths in the south of Lebanon. The Syrian government and Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces have agreed in principle to merge the SDF, the Democratic Forces, into the National Army, so said announcements this week. Yemen's Houthi rebels detained 20 UN employees in Sana'a, the nation's capital. And late last week, Iranian-backed Houthi rebels said the Houthis' military chief of staff, Major General Mohammed al-Ghamouri, had been killed in an Israeli-American airstrike. I did not read more about that. He was killed alongside of his 13-year-old son. Turkey's role in persuading Hamas has been significant and has bolstered Turkey's relationship with President Trump, so much so that there's goodwill to push for progress on the fighter jet sales of F-35s, and also the possibility of relief from U.S. sanctions for Turkey. Saudi Arabia is discussing a defense deal with the Trump administration, which also was in the news this week. A few updates from the U.S. Late last week, if Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, which was not the deal, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. So said President Trump, but then he was sure to say, it won't be us that's going to kill him. Someone else will go in. President Trump also said, he warned that if Hamas does not honor the deal, they will be taken care of very quickly. They're pretty violent people. We could do it in about 2 minutes, but we're going to give them a chance, President Trump said. Meanwhile, dozens of Senate Democrats urged Trump to reaffirm opposition to Israeli annexation of the West Bank. 46 Senate Democrats urged President Trump to reaffirm his opposition to annexation. Now, you'll be interested. I'm not going to give this update today, but I have updates for tomorrow about how Vice President Vance responded. He actually said he was disgusted that the Knesset had those votes about annexation. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Finally, closing with an update in terms of Christian engagement. Yesterday, we had a powerful prayer vigil with a number of diverse ecumenical leaders lamenting the loss of life over the last 2 years, coming together to remind one another to put our trust in God, his sovereignty and his goodness. That's a good reminder for me, especially today, that the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. We know that to be true. Leaders like Reverend Ashraf Tanus, Lutheran from Palestine, Presiding Bishop Yehiel Curry of the ELCA, Deacon Paul Fahili of the Episcopal Church, Bishop Hope Morgan Ward of the United Methodist Church, Mother Agapia Stephanopoulos, an Orthodox nun who's lived for years in Jerusalem, were all a part of the vigil. You can find that on our YouTube channel, and you can hear Fael's beautiful poem reminding us that we're called to make peace. Not just to talk about it, not just to give lip service to it, but to make peace. And Hannah from our team sang a lovely hymn reminding us to put ourselves in the presence of God. We pray that we have steadfastness as described in 1 James 1, 2-4. Do not be surprised when you face trials of many kinds. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, because you will know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. May it be so in the name of Christ. Amen.